How have black cultural structures contributed to the closeting of LGBT black men, and how has musical expression helped to bring them out? In this video, we will explain how gay and bi men have evolved throughout American history. A critical component of such an argument will be the connection of black church to gay men, such as the late Bayard Rustin, who organized the original March in Washington. In addition, there will be discussion of the down low, aka homosexual black men, who choose to masquerade as heterosexual because of the negative implications associated with being gay. Finally, a critical eye will be turned to the modern-day black icons who've used their queer status to change the conversation and the culture. Masculinity in the black imagination is reserved for strictly straight men. James Brown, Michael Jackson, and Tupac are all examples of sex symbols who brazenly proclaim their heterosexuality in song. Even Prince, a bisexual man, was relegated to the hetero sidelines because it was off-putting to mass audiences. Homosexuality could not be construed in the public consciousness because it was an other, a demonic force that took away from the pristine pedestal that black men could accomplish with their assertion of heterosexuality. In particular, this caused a shunning of the urges of the black body. The church as a place of worship, but also as a place of morality, became the leader in a black mainstream fight against this kind of devilry. This is perpendicular to the struggle of the down low men, who get no sympathy from their black counterparts. It also reinforced the sexual binary for black men, as theirs was a living of homosexuality and heterosexuality, with no options in between. Ours is a new age of options, where the internet has made it possible to freely identify as whatever sexuality a person chooses, but there's blowback, and larger swaths of black people have made it cognizant that gay people have... The internet has made it possible to freely identify as whatever sexuality a person chooses, but there is blowback, and larger swaths of black people have been cognizant of the humanity that gay people have been stripped of, and made it their duties to be allies to their brethren. This is paired with a wave of music and culture that has normalized and romanticized the gay experience, and more specifically, the black gay experience. Moonlight, Frank Ocean, and Jason Collins are all figures that have struck the iron of black queer justice while it is hot, and has progressed against the repression of times past.
What role have black spiritual ideologies played in the black queer man's access to HIV? Historically, the black church has played a large role in the black community. According to Guzman, the Negro church is founded more largely on a sociological than a theological basis. This is evident in the way the black community has used the church for a place of democracy and self-governance during a time of disenfranchisement, according to Blair L.M. Kelly. According to Quinn, Dixon Gomez, and Kelly, the black church has also been connected to a decrease in poor sexual and physical health effects, such as lower rates of risky health behaviors, decreased likelihood of substance use and delinquency, and fewer mental health issues. However, despite being a part of the church, black LGBT men have not always been able to see these benefits for themselves as a result of being in a church that doesn't approve of their sexual identity. For some, being a black queer man in church has meant susceptibility to homonegativity or negative attitudes toward homosexuality or queerness in general. According to Quinn, Dixon Gomez, and Kelly, many queer black men may encounter casual microaggressions and community gossip as a result of this homonegativity. This includes feelings of isolation, being gossiped about, ridiculed, and taunted by other church members who are not as welcoming or accepting of queer behavior. As a way to avoid the homonegativity associated with the church, black queer men do not acknowledge their sexual identities and have embraced the idea of a DL, the appearance of maintaining a heterosexual identity while still engaging in non-heterosexual behaviors. Take, for example, the experience of Herndon Davis.
Well, we got kind of, as America, are schizophrenic of the way we define gays in the military. Don't see, don't tell. In other words, you can stay in the military for the next 900 years and be gay. Just don't say you're gay.
Exactly.
Now, don't we kind of have that in the black church?
Oh, yes.
Or don't we kind of have that? Let's don't pick on the black church.
Okay.
All right. The whole society,
Mm-hmm.
in particularly the religious institutions, are like, okay, if you're that way, then just keep it on down low. Okay, stay on. Is that the tacit way our society is dealing with homosexual and gay people?
For generations. Before the word download ever came into existence, it was closet. Before closet, it was, I think there was even a word for it. Exactly. Don't ask, don't tell.
What is the difference in the way the black community deals with homosexuality within its own borders and the way the general community, white community, particularly Protestant and Catholic, deal with homosexuality within their borders? When I say borders, I mean families, churches, institutions.
Within the black community, we're taught to keep things just in the family. Don't tell all your business. Don't air all the dirty laundry at work, of course.
Dirty laundry means being gay.
Being gay, of course. And we're taught that we can't do everything that white people do, can't say everything that they do because we're black. Basically, in America, that's true. And so it's more of a, well, it's true, but we're not going to talk about it or admit that it exists because it might go away.
This kind of experience is not just specific to Davis. According to Quinn, Dixon Gomez, and Kelly, some black LGBT youth have reported modifying their dress, mannerisms, voice, and personalities to ensure a presumption of heterosexuality while growing up in non-welcoming church environments. As a result of the lack of discussion of LGBT culture and the coercion placed on black queer men by the black church to participate in the down-low culture, this has caused some to link the black church to HIV diagnosis and AIDS deaths. According to Harris, African Americans account for over half of all HIV cases. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, gay or bisexual men make up a majority of those cases, with black queer men constituting the largest portion, despite the decrease of diagnosis between 2008 and 2014. Since this disease has affected both LGBT and heterosexual African Americans, one might expect the black church to become involved and discuss this issue among the black community as a whole, considering the influence it has had in the past. However, according to Harris, there has been a refusal to address these topics within some black churches because of the association that queerness has with being immoral. Although this belief isn't limited to just the black church, black youth are more likely to go to church partly as a result of the indoctrination of its importance from family members, according to Quinn, Dixon Gomez, and Kelly. Because of the pressure to remain on the DL and the lack of acknowledgement of the HIV epidemic by the black church, one could say that the black church has prevented black queer men access to HIV prevention. Because the church can have major sociological influences, these same ideologies can extend outside the church, particularly for those inside the realm of music. This can have an inverse effect on one's ability to not go on the DL.
Black bisexual men have faced a long history of erasure and denial of their identities, both from the mass heterosexual community and from existentialist views within their own communities. Concepts like the down low and existentialist views on sexuality work hand in hand in helping to push this erasure forward, further marginalizing black bisexual men. While the down low is a relatively modern term, this concept, positioning black male bisexuality as a product of confusion and a danger to the heterosexual black woman is not new. Instead, it is a continuation of traditional views which deny bisexual black men the ability to take pride in their identity and demonizes those who do. In the face of such hostilities, black bisexual men find themselves in need to find ways to both reassure the validity of their sexuality and their right to live how they deem fit. To better understand where the ideology of the black man on the DL or down low comes from, you must first trace back the history of studying sexuality and the various ways in which the scientific community has classified it over the years. While bisexuality has culturally been around for centuries, attempts to categorize and define it can be explicitly linked to the last century up to today. One of the earliest references to it can be found in the works of Alfred Kinney, the man who authored the groundbreaking books Sexual Behaviors on the Human Male, 1948, and Sexual Behaviors of the Human Female, 1953. Kinsey is known to many as the grandfather of sexology, or the study of sexual human behaviors. These two books would go on to be called the Kinsey Report, and they, as well as his concept of the Kinney scale, or sexual fluidity, would go on to form the backbone of the sexology field. In Sexual Behaviors of the Human Male, Kinsey goes on to write, "Males do not represent two discrete populations, heterosexual and homosexual. The world is not divided into sheep and goats. Not all things are black, nor all things white. It is a fundamental of human taxonomy that nature rarely deals with discrete categories. Only the human mind invents categories and tries to force facts into separate pigeonholes." Page 63. In this quote, he's making it clear that his peers must reject the natural instinct to write about sexuality on a binary. Historically, when discussing human sexuality, both his peers then and many scientists today would organize human behavior as a binary between homosexual and heterosexual. While on its face, this might seem like a harmless way to organize human sexuality, it is clear that it has its numerous limitations. The chief of these limitations is that the binary assumes that a man or woman cannot engage in sex with both sexes, let alone with trans individuals or other marginalized sexual groups. As stated by Kinsey, the world is not divided into sheep or goats, but instead a diverse population of many different perspectives and practices. Through these differing views on human sexuality, two different perspectives have developed in the scientific world when discussing bisexuality. In the paper Between the Two, Bisexual Identity Among African Americans, scholar Lauren Henderson breaks down the debate over the nature of sexual orientation into two camps: essentialist and social constructionist views. Page 264. Both offer varying views on the origins of human sexual identities and practices. It must be analyzed next to each other to truly understand how both scientific and social communities can easily exclude the existence of bisexuals when discussing sexuality. Henderson presents the essentialist view as tied to the idea of sexuality being biologically based, static, and existing on a heterosexual-homosexual binary, while the social constructionists view sexuality as being very contextual, often affected by a wide variety of factors under the biological imprint. Where essentialists see the nature of sexuality as static and binary based, the social constructionist sees it as fluid and liable to shift throughout one's life. This means that the essentialist sees the bisexual as somebody who is confused or not able to fully express their homosexuality, while the constructionist sees them as part of a larger nuanced continuum. Page 264. She writes, "Postmodern and queer theorists have problematized the notion of sexuality as real categories. They argue that labeling oneself replicates the binary boundaries of sexuality and continues to establish hegemonic ideals of heterosexuality." You can see this statement playing out with the modern shift towards LGBTQ communities and organizations advocating for the use of the term queer as a more encompassing catch-all phrase for those who do not identify as heterosexual. Sadly, most historical research on sexuality tends to use the essentialist lens when conducting research and crafting studies. This has led to explicit gathering of data that only sees sexuality on the binary of heterosexual and homosexual. When participants are only greeted with language and studies that place them in one of these two categories, it often erases the ability to gather nuanced contextual data about those who choose to engage in intercourse with both sexes. Henderson places the blame for such a bias on the fact that those who are in charge of such studies often reside in a position of privilege. She points out, although an increased awareness of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transsexual sexual identities exists, contemporary analysis are often conducted by those who are located within several dominant societal groups. As a consequence, there remains a dearth of empirical scholarship focusing on the sexual identities of those who are not part of these dominant societal groups. Her critique here is spot on. Because of these positions of power and limited views of focus, scientific data about those who live outside of the positions are limited. Studies on bisexual male behavior are still relatively rare, and this becomes even more noticeable when you add a racial component to the mix. Of course, scientific studies do not happen within a bubble and are both influenced by and influence social views. In their paper, The Unfaithful Lover, Heterosexual Perceptions of Bisexuals and Their Relationships, 1997, scholars Leah R. Spalding, Elatia, and Pope conduct a study of over 350 heterosexual young adults to gauge their views on bisexual partners. The study concludes that a vast majority of those interviewed saw bisexuals as more likely to cheat and spread STDs than a heterosexual partner. Interestingly enough, when these same interviewees were asked about same-sex couples in which both participants were homosexual, these views shifted, instead seeing them as more monogamous and less likely to spread an STD. This is just one of many cases that show an unwavering bias against bisexual individuals. To add fuel to the fire, many researchers and scholars have noted an unwavering social tie between fears of the spread of HIV and AIDS and bisexuals. In the essay, and then there was the down low, Introduction to Black and Latino Male Bisexualities, scholar Theo G. M. Sanford and Brian Dodge pinpoint this 2004 show segment from Oprah Winfrey as when the ideology of the down low went mainstream.
Did not consider yourself gay?
No, I don't.
You don't?
No, I don't.
Because I can't figure that out.
Why do I have to label myself? Why do I have to put a label on myself to make you comfortable?
Okay, I don't want to be comfortable. I just want to know what it is.
In the Black community, if you come out and say I'm gay and proud, then automatically people look at you differently, they treat you differently. All of a sudden I become, oh, I want you to meet my gay friend, JL. I want you to meet my gay brother, JL. I want you to meet my gay father, JL.
Okay, and so that is the reason why it's called the down low.
Down low means I don't want anybody to know. I want to do what I do. It's my business, and it's none of your business what I do. It's wrong.
Okay. Okay, would down low also mean denial?
Denial, yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
As you can see in the clip, J.L. King, author of the book On the Down Low, talks about the desire to live in a world without labels, pointing out the stigmas and downsides of being labeled gay within his own community. Because of the dominant essentialist ideologies, he is not allowed to gain access to the status of bisexual, and must instead act on his desires in secret, leading to the term down low. What King may not see here in this interview is the negative connotations that will grow from such phrasing. Even Oprah's reactions to the men sharing of his stories points to signs of cultural backlash and demonization of male bisexuality. She half-jokingly asks us if the term DL could also mean denial, again continuing a long tradition of placing sexuality on a binary and positioning the bisexual male as the one who is confused instead of firm in his sexuality. Later in the hour-long special, she would go on to link this secretive bisexuality to the spread of HIV in the African American community. The statement would be structured with a pseudo-warning to straight black women of the need to watch out for the danger of bisexual black men. Sanford and Dodge point out the flaws of the down low ideology, first by pointing out that it lacks a clear, consistent definition, and later by pointing out that it positions bisexuality as a new phenomenon, which is extremely ahistorical. They know that Oprah's positioning of the bisexuality as a shameful act helps to turn bisexual black men into the scapegoats of the HIV/AIDS crisis, writing, although down low men seem useful scapegoats for the disproportionately high prevalence of rates of HIV among black women, any direct empirical evidence regarding the role of the down low phenomenon in the HIV epidemic among African Americans is lacking. Though the evidence is lacking, that does not mean the cultural blaming of the crisis to black bisexual men does not exist. To the contrary, these linkings can be found in many African American newspapers, especially during the height of the crisis. While Oprah may have helped popularize the phrase down low in the mid 2000s, worries of such phenomenon can be traced to decades before. In this article published by the Chicago Metro News in 1988, you can see a clear link being made between HIV/AIDS and bisexuality, with the author going out of their way to connect a mother's contraction of the virus with her partner's sexuality. When said connection is linked to the death of an infant, it is easy to see how such coverage can lead to the fear of the bisexual man, though it is also important to remember that this article was published in 1988, at the height of the AIDS crisis. During this time, the virus was still relatively new, and those in the news media were still learning how to correctly cover it. Sanford and Dodge note that the overall news and scientific coverage of the bisexual men when linked to HIV and AIDS can create a negative connotation regardless of the publisher's intentions. This becomes a problem of association. When a majority of the already rare scientific studies being published on bisexuality is related to his role in HIV/AIDS, public associations of the two are doomed to follow. Another interesting aspect in the role of newspapers is the reinforcing of essentialist views on gender and sexuality. In its 1991 editorial response, published in the National Chronicle, a homosexual writer is seen boiling bisexuality down to black men not being able to express their homosexuality. Again, this mind state both assumes that bisexuality is not an actual sexual orientation, but instead a result of lacking the ability to fully access one's homosexual identity, and reinforces the idea that it is somewhat of a shameful status. With such societal beliefs simultaneously erasing and demonizing their identity, while scientific studies are not doing much to counteract this, the final question to ponder is clear. In the book The Global Organizer, Hip-Hop, Political Development, and Movement Culture, editors Christopher Malone and George Martinez collect an extensive list of essays that divide the resistance strategies that hip-hop and hip-hop artists use to fight back against master narratives in an attempt to define their own identities. In the 8th chapter, author Anne Flaherty speaks of the power musicians wield in using music to reinsert their place in the world. She writes, "For marginalized peoples, hip-hop represents a medium in which they can express their culture and voices in a revolutionary way. Artists and organizers have also used hip-hop as part of mechanisms to develop alternative institutions to support social and economic justice, as well as encourage political participation." Here she's asserting the importance in music for defining and protecting the identities of not only the artists, but also the communities they belong to. A modern case of such a thing can be found in the actions of singer-songwriter Frank Ocean. In July 2012, Ocean did something that would forever change hip-hop and R&B. He came out as bisexual. On his debut album, he placed 2 songs that explicitly talk about his experiencing romantic feelings for another man. The songs, Bad Religion and Forrest Gump, are honest, beautiful portrayals of what it means to be in love and the pain that comes with it. Also present on the 17-track album are songs that talk about his love for women, and several tracks where the gender of the object of affection is noticeably absent, instead being replaced with the term you. This meaning was clear. This is Ocean staking claim to his right to live, love, and breathe in a culture that would rather erase his sexual identity. Though the album would go on to gain both commercial and critical success, one of the biggest conversations around the project was whether Ocean identified as bi or gay. The artist himself wouldn't comment on his status, and instead go on a 4-year seclusion from the press to work on his follow-up projects, Endless and Blonde, both of which were released in 2016 and continue the themes of loving both genders. After releasing said projects, he dropped the song Chanel, which many have gone to call the bisexual anthem. The now iconic opening lines read, "The wordplay and imagery here is vivid, with Ocean comparing his bisexuality to the logo of the famous clothing line Chanel. Through this song, many fans were able to better come to terms with their own identity, taking up the song as a banner of unity. This can be seen in the social media response to the song. By asserting his identity, Ocean is actively fighting against the erasure of the black bisexual man, instead making it something to champion. Of course, this is only the continuation of a long practice of black, gay, and bisexual men using their music as a form of active resistance. And to truly understand the gravity of Ocean's positioning, you must first look at the history as a whole.
What has recently challenged black heteromasculinity that has allowed black LGBTQ men to move on from the down low, and what new roles has this created for LGBTQ black musicians? Historically, we have learned about most music through the radio and television. Both public radio and television have always had rules in place, either technical or social, which typically keep non-heterosexual content from entering the pop culture mainstream. So if an LGBTQ artist wanted to have a successful career, chances were they either had to hide their sexuality or at the very least adjust the pronouns in their songs to fit heteronormative standards. According to bell hooks, misguided assumptions about what makes a male gay still flourish. Everyday boys who express feelings are psychologically terrorized and in extreme cases brutally beaten by parents who fear that a man of feeling must be homosexual. Hooke's point goes to show that softness and other so-called feminine features are punished in men because they imply that that man is gay, which is in turn considered to be bad. This is particularly true for black men, who have largely found it necessary to adopt a hyper-masculine coolness in order to assert their roles as men after years of emasculation by white supremacy during slavery and beyond. According to Iguchi and Roberts, the hyper-heterosexualization of black masculinity has repudiated aesthetic forms of attitude, behavior, performance, appearance, and style associated with effeminacy, since they illustrate a sign of softness and weakness. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, and several openly gay black men were able to achieve fame and gain public respect. Prince, the late musician and actor, was able to make a legendary career while performing outside of the confines of black masculinity. He was known for his effeminate and flamboyant clothes and makeup. However, despite his open acknowledgement of his unique relationship with gender and sexuality and its relative acceptance, he still addressed love songs only to women, and his non-heterosexual personal life was not made public. Another example of a successful and openly gay musician is the black composer Julius Eastman, most active in the 1970s. Revered in minimalist and classical worlds, Eastman authored pieces which were named in ways that he knew were extremely provocative, especially in his time. His song titles included slurs and mentions of his sexuality, and they were intended to be celebratory for his identity as a black and gay man. According to Chessa, when naming his pieces, Eastman chose to fill what would otherwise have been an empty slot with a socio-political commentary, a vindication of sorts. He chose to fill that void with something that could make people think more than they would had these compositions been titled Symphony or Concerto or Piece for Pianos, and so on. However, increasingly we are getting our media and culture from the internet and social media. This is especially true of younger generations, who are generally more comfortable and accepting of non-heterosexuality more than those before them. Queer artists began to realize that if they couldn't get their music played on radio or TV, they had to find other ways to promote it. Iguchi and Roberts state that for many of them, most use the internet as a way to reach their limited and targeted minority audience. One such artist is Young Fly Red, whose 2014 song and video, Throw That Boy Pussy, went viral.
About to make them dance now. Yeah.
Throw that boy pussy, roll that boy pussy, roll that, throw 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 that.
The video resembles many other popular music videos in that it features a man objectifying people who pose as sex objects, but it features a man objectifying other men, so it became a spectacle. While we accept the sexual objectification of women as part of the cultural canon, we find masculinity is challenged by the objectification of men. However, this video still exists as a representation of the binary of masculine and powerful and submissive and docile, with the performer positioning himself as the one in power. Iguchi and Roberts state that, on the other hand, the black queer performance of a sexual bottom, a man who gets penetrated, is sociopolitically and historically feminized, stigmatized, and devalued as queen, sissy, and the F-slur. These role identifications, such as tops and bottoms, are more than simply sexual preferences. They are simultaneously about the sociopolitical, cultural, economic, and historical performances of power. Increasingly, however, largely because of the power of the internet to make one culturally successful without as rigid constraints as radio or TV, we're seeing more and more openly queer black male musicians. Media consumers who find their content through the internet are embracing more openly LGBTQ artists and overtly LGBTQ content than radio and TV have before. Their increased representation in popular media, along with their success and acceptance, has made room for queer black men to exist out of the down low and to carve out niches for themselves, defining themselves how they want, especially in ways outside of the prescribed black masculinity. One example is the budding musician Shamir, who has this to say on gender and sexuality.
So, you don't really realize how much gender and sexuality is apart until you grow up and you have to, like, you know, go into the real world and you're like, damn, like everything's so separated and it's like really ridiculous. So I don't know, I think when it comes to my music and who I am as a person, I just try to be like really honest.
Do you ever find it the hyper masculinity in rap music? Do you find that problematic?
I don't find it problematic, but sometimes it makes it harder to like imagine, you know, someone as myself who is like, you know, more feminine to have a place in hip hop or in rap. And I think you know, the new wave of queer people in rap music has definitely changed that.
Frank Ocean is letting black men know that being bisexual is okay and being soft and tender is okay. Tyler, the Creator, is letting black men know that they can be queer and still do masculine things such as skateboarding and using aggressive lyrics. Brockhampton, a large group of rappers who describe themselves as a boy band, feature an openly gay member, Kevin Abstract. His verses include allusions to being gay, some sexual, despite being on songs with other men who are not gay. Together, Kevin Abstract and Brockhampton are defying a typical tenet of masculinity by demonstrating that gay men can be close friends with straight men, and the proximity doesn't threaten the straight men's masculinity or heterosexuality. Many of these musicians have only become popular in the last 5 or 6 years, which means that we are only at the beginning of this cultural change. From the down low to now and beyond, LGBTQ black men are carving out new identities for themselves and escaping the rigidity of the heteropatriarchy.
Whether gay or bi, black men have asserted their masculinity or transgressed throughout the various struggles and tribulations that have plagued them over the past century. Looking towards the current climate, one can see that while blessed with quality gay representation, it is a minefield of aggressive political plays waiting to happen, and that militantly fighting the reactionary forces that be is the only way to keep freedoms for all threatened. Whether in church, closeted and shamed, or alongside the mainstream, black gay men have an important story to tell in the history of black masculinity.